Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Recess founder and CEO Ben Witte grew up in an era where the fast-paced lifestyle sometimes outpaced our ability to process it all. So he leveraged his deep background in building and scaling companies into building a new lifestyle brand for the times, Recess.
We now live in an omnichannel world. This idea of direct-to-consumer, in my opinion, is somewhat nonsense. Right? Like the inevitability of consumer products companies and any type of consumer experience is clearly about becoming omnichannel.
We talk about his background, 2 starts and 1 stop based on his experience, and perspectives around going to market in 2021. Let's have a listen to what he has to say in advance of his appearance on the virtual stage at CommerceNext, coming up later in the month. Ben, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on board. Let's jump right in. Tell us about yourself, your background, and talk about Recess. What are you building there?
I'll start all the way at the beginning. I grew up in Southern California in a surf town called Laguna Beach. I was very much a creative in high school into all types of art and design, but I ended up studying business in college. And I'm 32, and I kind of moved to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, in 2010. Right as the startup tech scene was very much taking off there. And I was at 2 different startups for the first 7 years of my career in Silicon Valley, and really learned, I'd say, how to build companies. I very much look at Silicon Valley as not just about technology, but about company building.
Building scale, right? I mean, that's really a skill that just doesn't come.
Exactly. Right? And so I think when, I was really immersed, in that culture, all my friends were investors or at other startups. And so, it was very, exciting and interesting to me. And I knew I, someday wanted to start my own company. And, the other thing I, recognized was if I was going to start my own company, I recognized the importance of kind of working on an idea that suits your strengths and passions, and that my strengths and passions were more suited for building, consumer brands and in consumer experiences versus technology for businesses, for example.
Right.
And so I set out on my own, and I explored a couple different ideas. But about 3 years ago, the inspiration, for Recess came. I saw CBD oil and other functional ingredients like adaptogens and magnesium kind of bubbling up in natural food stores, focused on helping consumers feel relaxed. And I have always been kind of a naturally stressed out, anxious, wired millennial. I was always looking for things that would help me, calm down and rebalance, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I started using, CBD oil and, other compounds like that, and I felt better. And I just had a number of insights from that experience. The first being, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Stress and anxiety had clearly been, skyrocketing as a result of this transformational period that we're living in, driven by technology and all the second and third order consequences on society, right? Mm-hmm. The introduction of social media, the political environment becoming a lot more partisan, the economy becoming a lot more dynamic, and that is stressful. And in many ways, we weren't built and designed for the world that we're now living in. And so that has led us to become very stressed. Basically, the introduction of CBD was really a reflection of that, right? It really met that need in terms of being a compound that could help people calm down. And my insight was very simple, that basically the user experience of putting oil under your tongue that tastes like grass is not a great one. But the way to think about CBD as a compound, no more interesting than caffeine or alcohol. Ultimately just a commoditized functional ingredient that delivers an effect. The question I asked myself was, who are the biggest caffeine companies in the world? That's Red Bull, that's Monster, that's Starbucks, that's Coca-Cola. And none of them are marketing caffeine. They're marketing how it makes you feel. Yeah. And that kind of led to the brand strategy of Recess, which was we wanted to create a brand that basically communicated like the idea of relaxation. And instead of marketing CBD and adaptogens like every other brand does, we wanted to establish a new usage occasion in consumers' lives of taking a recess and define a new feeling that we define as calm, cool, collected, which is effectively the equivalent of Red Bull gives you wings. What I see emerging here is the next biggest category in the CPG industry focused on relaxation at different moments throughout, consumers' days. And this category is going to exist across both beverages, supplements, food products, and digital experiences.
Ingestibles, everything, right?
Everything, right?
Your story is very familiar to me in a couple of ways. I often find when I talk to businesses, folks, leaders in the cannabis or the hemp or the CBD space, that there's often an intersection of the personal and the professional, and you've just highlighted that as well. And the second thing is, it's been so interesting watching, as you say, the demand, because the biggest category over the past 10 years or so has been wake up drinks, like activity, get me up, get me going. And then, it was almost like a natural reaction became, okay, wake me up. And now I need something to put me down because I'm overstimulated. Right. So I think it's a brilliant observation. Let's break beyond just, we're not talking functional benefits here. We're not talking technical. We're talking emotional benefits. We're talking about the feeling that you want to have with the product, rather than knowing what's in the product necessarily to the degree that you, as you said,
And one of my that's a great observation. And what I, one of my observation about, the consumer packaged goods space and the food and beverage space is that categories rise as a reflection of what's happening in society, right? So energy drinks over the past 20 years, have exploded. In fact, Monster Energy is the single best performing stock in the US over the past 20 years. It grew by like 100,000%, I believe. And the rise of energy drinks is really a reflection, the zeitgeist in society around the world at the time was globalization, build, growth at all costs, right?
I got to keep up. I got to keep up. I need something to keep up. I need that stimulant to keep pace, basically, not to get ahead of it.
Yeah. And the next 20 years, I think, are about dealing with the world around us that we built for ourselves that we're not prepared for. Right. And so, we use caffeine to get throughout the day, to build up the energy to be able to go to work, get work done, and get throughout the day. And we use alcohol to intoxicate us at the end of the day. Really, when you think about it, I see this category as a substitute for both products. Actually, what we see at Recess is, the interesting question to ask is, when people are drinking a Recess, what are they drinking it instead of? And it's typically coffee in the afternoon or an energy drink, and alcohol in the evening. And so what we see happening here is there just being a number of occasions throughout your day where you would typically historically have turned to a caffeinated beverage or an alcoholic beverage, where increasingly you're going to turn to beverages within this category.
Well, you're definitely onto something. Now let's talk about the 2 starts and 1 stop. You're speaking to CommerceNext, so it's not a CPG event. It's about building a brand. It's about digital. It's about marketing. It's about e-commerce. About all those things. In your experience, building past, but also in this crazy first phase of the COVID era last year, you're building a company in the middle of a pandemic. Give me your experience about, and your advice to the listeners, 2 things they should start doing if they're not already doing, and 1 thing they should maybe stop doing that they've been doing and maybe relied on it, or you've learned that it's not working. Give us some advice.
The first thing that I think is so important for founders and for brands is to have a compelling story and narrative for what your company is and why it exists. If you don't have a narrative and a story and a vision that both consumers and the business world understands, you're not going to be able to recruit, you're not going to be able to raise money, you're not going to be able to sell. And then on the consumer side, I think in a digital world, a brand has to have something to say, right? I like to, in the beverage industry, I like to say, a brand, in the past, brands were built on the shelf. Today, they're built on your phone, and that fundamentally changes everything. Right. But a social media strategy, for example, is not posting pictures of different angles of your can every day. You better have something to say.
I do like your image. I do like your imagery on your site, by the way. The can opening up. It is very quite sharp. Notwithstanding that, tell me one thing. Just I want to step back one quick second. How do you go to market with Recess? How do people find the product? It looks like you've got a subscription type service, and tell us a little bit about that for context.
Well, that was actually going to lead into my second recommendation, which is we now live in an omnichannel world. This idea of direct to consumer, in my opinion, is somewhat nonsense. Right? Like the inevitability of consumer products companies and any type of consumer experience is clearly about becoming omnichannel. Recess, our go-to-market was we launched direct to consumer, and then we launched in New York, in the New York metro market in New York City. And now we're in like 8 states, throughout the country. You'll be on Amazon. The thing with beverages is it makes sense for them to be sold everywhere. But I think that's increasingly true of most companies. And so one of my pieces of advice to people is from day one, design an organization and a company and a brand that's designed for an omnichannel world. And I think that's just fundamental, truth today. And I think it's completely underappreciated, the implications of that. Both if you're coming, as established just, analog business that's only existed, in offline retail, it's hard to reorient your brand to become truly omnichannel. And I think, D2C brands too sometimes struggle with this. So I think it's important is to think about omnichannel as early as possible.
All right. So great advice. Start thinking as soon as possible about this new reality or the reality we live in. What should people do less of? What should they stop doing? The reasons I think Recess has been, has a chance of being successful is that we have a company that has people from both, beverage industry, leaders that have been in this industry for 20 and 30 years, as well as many people that have never, worked a day in the industry before Recess. And I think as a result of that, we are able to think outside of the box and bring, new perspectives and old perspectives to thinking from first principles about what our strategy should be. And so one of the things I think companies should stop doing is only hiring people from the industries that they're operating in, and instead focus on hiring people that come from other industries that can bring new perspectives about building a company in that space. Oh, that's great advice. Now, at CommerceNext, what are you doing at CommerceNext, and when are you doing it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, we're going to be, I think, going into more detail about the Recess approach to building a consumer brand in this new world, right? And I think many of the lessons from Recess, which is right now just a beverage brand, but I don't think of it that way, will apply to businesses of all kinds. And so I'm looking forward to having a conversation about at least what I've learned so far and how we think about the world.
Well, it's a great story because you're clearly operating at the top of that brand ladder, right? From technical to functional to emotional benefits. You're at that lifestyle brand, which is that aspiration for many brands. They get to that place where, you are seen as part of a lifestyle rather than an ingredient to be consumed. So congratulations on that. I mean, it's a great brand story, and I look forward to hearing all about it and hearing more about it at CommerceNext. So Ben, thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail, and I wish you much continued success.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My pleasure.
Today's podcast is part of an ongoing series of CommerceNext episodes that will feature some of the fantastic speakers taking the virtual stage January 20th, 27th, February 3rd with snapshot insights into how they dealt with the online and e-commerce world in their first year of the COVID era, lessons learned for the future. You can learn more and register for CommerceNext at commercenext.com. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and all the insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we can continue to get amazing guests like Ben onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website, meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.